Hello, my name is Charlie Morris and this is Atlas Pulse TV. Today in the studio I'm joined by David Gerard, author of The 50-Foot Blockchain. Welcome, David.
Hello.
So you've written this book, which is The Attack of the 50-Foot Blockchain. And I read it a couple of weeks ago. It's a thoroughly good read. But you're a big critic of blockchain, aren't you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot dubious about it. It's interesting, but that's different from useful or a good idea. I think those two are a bit more of a dubious proposition. So I wanted to write something that looked into the history of it, could explain it to people. I mean, I think it's fascinating stuff, but for instance, I don't hold Bitcoins. I'm not someone who's got into cryptos in that manner.
And your motivation for writing this book, which obviously it's very well researched, it's very well referenced. I've only found one mistake, and but other than that, I think it's all good to go, and it's a thoroughly amusing and enjoyable read. Now, I would say it's a critical on Bitcoin, and most people at the moment are there's a lot of hype out there, and I think that even if you're really bullish on Bitcoin, it would serve you well to see another opinion. So, what is your main criticism of blockchain?
The criticism of Bitcoin or blockchain.
You go.
Well, basically, I think the currency itself, insofar as it's a currency, is it a commodity, a currency, or whatever, it's sort of used for all these things. It was a clever idea, but it was also a very naive idea. It attracted a lot of people who didn't know what they were doing, and often still don't know what they're doing. This then attracted a lot of people who were dubious, a lot of scammers, a lot of serial scammers. You have people who committed Bitcoin frauds who turned out to have long records as mail fraudsters or whatever. Basically, an exciting new thing where nobody understands it will attract starry-eyed naifs, and it will attract predators to prey upon them. You can make money in cryptos, totally, but it's a really risky area to invest in. You have to know your stuff, or you will be the one those guys make their money from.
So you'll be the chump at the table if you don't know who the chump is. That's what you're saying.
Yep. And if you think you do, you may be the chump at the table.
Sure, but I think most people in the Bitcoin trading space or digital assets in general, they understand it's seriously risky. I mean, I don't know many people that are peddling it to widows and orphans. But is that happening?
Oh, totally. I mean, I originally wrote this with only a very small audience in mind of like people who were really into this stuff and thought it was amusing. But then the bubble started, the 2017 crypto bubble, and you started seeing things like articles in the tabloids. Daily Mail or The Sun or whatever would have a page in their business section about the exciting new world of Bitcoin and cryptos. And normal people shouldn't be going anywhere near these things. This is not a safe asset. It's not something you want to put your retirement nest egg into. It's totally not that class of asset.
To be fair, it's pretty hard to do that because to actually most banks won't let you deal with the exchanges. It's hard to open accounts at these exchanges. Most people wouldn't know what to do. So I can't imagine that you're sort of going to people and saying this is really risky and it's a crazy space and it's not as real as you think. These are your kind of messages, aren't they?
That's my messages about dealing in crypto assets. I mean, it's very hard to get into, thankfully, which is good because that means you have to be quite motivated to get into in the first place. I'm thinking of one of my wife's church friends, actually, just a normal retiree, reads the Daily Mail, has recently retired, looking at Bitcoin to try to stretch the nest egg out a bit. And she went, I tried to get into it. It was really hard to buy. And we both went, no, keep away from it. You are not the person for this.
But she could put £100 in or something if she wanted to. I mean, what's wrong with that?
Oh, nothing's wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having a flutter.
Fine.
I mean, a lot of people do this, like some of the retail exchanges like Coinbase, for example. I know someone who read my book and then went out and spent £5, bought some Ethereum, and has had a very personal educational experience watching it turn into 250. And education won't get elsewhere. And it'll go up and go down, but yeah.
I'd say your friend was very unlucky if his £5 went to 250 because Ethereum hasn't done that badly.
Oh yeah, but it's having a flutter is one thing, treating it as an actual investment is another.
Well, let's get to that. I mean, so far what we've seen is an enormous growth in this space. So digital assets are now worth knocking on the door of $200 billion, coming from nowhere in 2009. Now, that's not because $200 billion has gone into the space. That's been created by an internal economy, if you like.
That's actually a good question, because I think that when you talk about the market cap of a cryptocurrency, it's a misnomer. It's an erroneous term. It's not the amount of money put into it. It's not the amount of money you can get out of it. It's an imaginary number that's good for headlines. It's easy to calculate, but it doesn't tell you anything useful. Trading is so thin that there's no way you could realise a fraction of it, for example.
I agree with that point, because it's an equity term. Market capitalizations comes from the stock market.
It's
and of course,
not like
a whole company could be bought, but the whole network couldn't be bought. If one person bought the whole network,
doesn't make sense.
It would be worthless. And I think network value is probably a better description, and you probably would want to exclude hoarded coins to some degree to get a better understanding of
network value is an interesting one, because how would you calculate the size of it? Anyone who does know the numbers, absolutely all the incentives would be for them to exaggerate them, make it look bigger than it is. So it's all a tricky one.
Fine. So going back to blockchain. So we just touched on Bitcoin. Go back to blockchain
itself.
The underlying technology that drives the whole system. What's your criticism of that, or are you quite complimentary in certain areas?
Bits of it are good, bits of it are bad.
Let's do the negatives first.
Okay. If you want something that a lot of the promises of blockchain, of the way it's marketed, the marketing of business blockchain was literally started by people who just watched Bitcoin crash, but they liked the technology and wanted to propagate it more because they thought it was a good technology. Fair enough. So the thing is that a lot of the promises and hype, you can instantly reconcile everything with no trust and it'll all be magically done in seconds, is literally Bitcoin hype with the buzzword changed. And a lot of it doesn't apply to the actual technologies that are being deployed. Now, there are good bits. You'll see products that are called blockchain that are actually just a ledger with tamper-proofing with hashing. This is a technology we've had for decades.
So hashing, what that means is improved security for the network compared to a traditional database.
What it does is it's like taking a checksum, like the check digit on the end of your credit card or something, except a much longer number. And the thing about that is it's fast to calculate, but very hard and infeasible to forge. So that means if you say the hash of this thing is 72159 or whatever, it'll be very hard to fake that. So you can be reasonably confident that your database has integrity if your copy has the same hash, which you can check quickly.
So the hashing element of it, you're behind.
Yeah, it's good.
The Merkle tree, which is the sort of family tree
that's the tree of hashes.
History.
That works well.
You think that's good. So which is the bit you don't like?
When you try to decentralize it when you shouldn't, because decentralization is always expensive,
But isn't that the whole point? You know, we're living in a world. I'm going to quote Macquarie's Victor Schvetz. I apologise, Victor, if I haven't pronounced your name correctly. They represent, bitcoins and digital assets represent a desperate search for alternatives to the train wreck that is the modern financial system. And it's infinitesimal. I mean, $200 billion in the schemes of the trillions of the financial system. I mean, who cares?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the interest and a lot of the Bitcoin bubble or the crypto bubble is because safe, sane assets aren't giving good returns. So people who are desperate for returns, there's a lot of money slushing around looking for a home. So people look to assets that have good returns, and they don't look so hard at what's actually the sort of system and how robust it is, because the crypto system is very shaky and amateurish in a lot of ways.
Well, in investments, and I've seen this many, many times over the years, the best advertising campaign you could possibly have is a rising price. And that attracts a lot of people.
Oh, totally.
Not totally understanding what's behind it.
Yep.
But, I have a vision for this new asset class. It's an experiment. I see it as an aggressive experiment. And there's things that are trying to happen. But you're saying nothing's happened yet that's useful, and nothing will happen.
Now, I would not say that philosophically nothing could possibly happen. I don't think that Bitcoin-style cryptocurrencies are sustainable. Perhaps Ethereum is trying desperately to solve the scaling problem because Bitcoin's really slow.
So Bitcoin, 7 transactions per second is the cap compared to MasterCard, Visa, which is
thousands per second,
thousands or 50,000 or whatever it is.
And Ethereum is like 14 or so, 14 to 16, and I know that Ethereum are working really hard on solving this problem, for example, but they don't have a way through yet. The technology is really immature. The Ethereum developers are actually quite open about that. They say, what are you doing putting money into this? You're nuts. This is really unstable alpha software. We keep having to fix it all the time. What are you doing? I mean, they were actually up to their necks in the DAO, which collapsed last year, but they've learnt their lesson, I think.
So basically what you've got is it's a database which has got extra security because of the hashing function that you've described.
So
that requires
yeah.
That requires more computational power, and then to make it a public blockchain like Bitcoin, it requires even more power. This time electrical power,
yes.
which drives the computers. And you're saying that 56%, the Bitcoin network requires 56% equivalent of Ireland's entire energy consumption.
I think at the moment it's running about half an Ireland. You measure Bitcoin consumption in islands. That's the conventional measure.
And that's IRE, not a small island somewhere. I mean, that's a hell of a lot of electricity. And
Yes.
some people would say that validates the value of a Bitcoin. It puts some intrinsic value into it. It's hard to make. And if you go down Bond Street and find a dress or a handbag that's hard to make, then it's worth more than one that's easy to make on Oxford Street.
Just because it's hard to make doesn't mean it's worth something afterwards. The price comes from speculation.
Well, it comes from supply and demand, surely.
Yeah, to some extent.
People want it, some people don't want it, they sell, some people want it, they buy.
Yeah, but that doesn't actually justify the electricity as such.
And 2 years ago, not many people wanted to buy it and not many people wanted to sell it. Now lots of people want to do it. You've created a network.
A network is a thing of value in
I
itself.
mean, it comes
as you
and
pointed
goes,
out.
it comes in and out of fashion. There is a value to that.
I'm pretty sure that the electricity doesn't fuel that. I think the electricity is just something they spend because that's how it was set up.
Ecologically, one can understand that that's a criticism. But you could also say that, it's our privilege in a free society to consume energy how we want to. If we want to have an electric car or some gadget we don't really need, like a motorbike or something at weekends, I mean, that's our privilege.
Well, functionally, yeah, it is, but it's still a waste.
Fine.
Yeah. And there are the other thing about business blockchain as well is pushing smart contracts. I've got a whole chapter on why the idea of smart contracts, where you try to automate the law or business arrangements and so on, is probably not going to work out that well.
Why?
Because law and computer programming are completely different fields. And when you have a contract problem, it's always the tricky bits and the ambiguous bits. And
When the law comes into its own.
when you have to actually go to court and say, he said, she said, what were you thinking at the time? What are the actual outside world circumstances? We actually see the problems where you can't change contracts after they've been put out there because they're immutable. You can't fix bugs. You can't fix security holes. Anyone can see them. No one can fix them. Or as we saw when
There's no customer services, in other words.
there's no customer service.
Yeah.
And
Well, for some people, that's the point. Some people like that.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to go through
Yep.
a few quotes, what people have said about Bitcoin. So we know that our friend Jamie Dimon has said that anyone involved in it is stupid and it's a fraud. Now then we've got Morgan Stanley's James Gorman, who says Bitcoin is certainly more than a fad. It's an interesting concept. Ben Bernanke said serious problems. Don't know where he got that from. He caused serious problems, we know that much. Mark Carney, the potential to enhance resilience. Abby Johnson, the head of Fidelity, says that she's a believer and has accepted it in the staff canteen at Fidelity. Paul Krugman says that Bitcoin is evil. From Paul Krugman, that's saying something. Christine Lagarde says it will give existing currencies a run for their money. That's head of the IMF. And Janet Yellen says it's an important new technology. And by the way, I love that moment when she was giving her Fed minutes and there was someone saying, buy Bitcoin behind with a placard. that was one of my favourite moments of 2017. Who would you think is, who would you follow there? Do you think interesting concept, fraud, serious problem? Who do you agree with?
I wouldn't say Bitcoin is a fraud because everyone involved in it is desperately sincere. A lot of them are very naive, and this attracts fraudsters, as I said, and as we've observed, I think, and I set out quite a lot in the book. Interesting is different from useful.
Sure.
That's important.
You've made that point very clearly.
It
I
is
think
an
that,
interesting new thing.
yeah.
I mean, Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever he was, clearly had a moment of genius there. It's a really interesting idea.
You expect the idea, you respect the idea, you respect
Totally.
the code, but you just think the ecosystem doesn't have the potential that many people, you think the hype around blockchain and the potential for digital assets is far more limited than what we're seeing.
The reality is it's a lot less than it appears.
Yeah.
basically. But I think it's interesting, and I've tried to describe it in an interesting manner and tried to get across how this thing actually works and all the bits where it sort of goes wrong. And that's important to know. There may be potential in it, we will see.
Yeah. Well, I've always said that, you know, to be a Bitcoiner, you need to have an interest in technology. You have to quite enjoy the internet and computers, that sort of thing. You need to have an interest in finance. And you also need to have a sense of humour. If you have those three things, then you can join this space.
You have to be able to laugh at yourself when suddenly something goes wrong.
And the space. And the space is funny. The whole thing's amusing, isn't it? It's like a little train set on the real world economy.
Indeed. Occasionally horrifying, but a few train crashes, some tragedies, but yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
So let's go back to the book. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed reading it, as I said. I think it's well written, it's quite amusing in places, well researched. And how many have you sold?
About 1,750 as of last night, which is a lot for a completely self-published book. Like, I try to do it professional standards, but it's completely self-published. You can do that these days.
And self-published means that they print, in this case, one at a time. Is that right? Some sort of photocopier thing bangs out one of these.
A lot of major publishers actually use this now. Like, they'll do a deal with Amazon to print one copy when it's ordered because they have a long backlist and they want to keep it available without having boxes of books gathering dust. And it's fully professional quality. It's just more expensive.
But unsurprisingly, in a digital space, you sold many more books digitally than you have in hardback.
Yeah, about 350 paperbacks. About the rest is ebooks. Mostly on Kindle, a few through Smashwords and the other ebook stores. It's in all the ebook stores, and the paperback is Amazon.
I have to say, as a final word, David, I mean, it's been a pleasure to meet you and talk through this book. I did enjoy reading it, but you're much more of a bear and a skeptic in the book than you are in real life. Having met you twice now, then you slag it off here quite harshly, but in real life, actually, you sort of a part of you quite enjoys the whole thing and admires what's going on.
Oh, it is my favourite thing to do with internet as television. Watch the amazing things that are happening in the Bitcoin space lately. It's fun.
Good stuff. Well,
as bad hobbies go, it's pretty good.
Good. Well, David Gerard, thank you very much for coming, and thank you for watching Atlas Pulse. This is the 4th episode in our series. Please look out for the others. Look up Atlas Pulse TV through Google or whatever, you'll find them. They're fantastic viewing, if I may say so myself.